Good morning, and as Mike mentioned, I'm Tim Rockline, I'm president of the Sarasota Manatee Council of the Navy League, and I want to thank you all for including us yet again in this event. First, don't let our name fool you, please. We're not part of the U.S. Navy. Okay? The Navy League is a group of civilians and a civilian organization of nearly 50,000 Americans. It was founded over a century ago by President Theodore Roosevelt, or so I'm told. I wasn't there when that happened. And we're dedicated to the support of all of the sea services, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Merchant Marines. We're committed to educating and informing the American people as to the importance of the sea power to our national security. We understand that ours is a maritime nation, critically dependent on maritime commerce, and that a strong commercial U.S. flag merchant marine is essential to our national well-being. Our economy depends on international trade, and any disruption in the global supply chain would have a disastrous effect on the U.S. economy and our national security. As the world's trade leader, the United States needs a secure and an efficient marine transportation system to move billions of tons of cargo and millions of passengers every year. Most people don't appreciate the importance of the security of our system because during their lives, maritime commerce has seldom, if ever, been disrupted. And we want to keep it that way. There are two important issues, though, that we need to address if we are to maintain our maritime security. First, as many of you are aware, most of the ships and products that support our maritime transportation system are produced and constructed overseas, making it essential that our nation sustains an individual and technological base that supports a strong merchant marine, Coast Guard, Navy, and Marine Corps. And second, as our need for reliable marine transportation continues to grow, the pool of skilled U.S. mariners must be maintained. To address these two issues, the Navy League actively supports the following. One, we support an active commercial U.S. flag merchant marine fleet that we can rely upon to transport cargo for the Department of Defense in time of peace and in war. Two, we support budgetary and legislative measures, including changes in U.S. tax laws and regulations, needed to maintain a viable U.S. flag merchant marine. Three, we support continued full funding for the 60-ship Maritime Security Program. Four, we support the Jones Act and the Passenger Vessel Act that govern domestic trade, and we urge opposition to any legislation or trade agreements that would weaken them. Five, we support maintenance of the Ready Reserve Force. Six, we support funding for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, the state maritime colleges, and programs at union and industry training facilities. Seven, we support efforts by the Coast Guard to expedite the licensing and documentation of merchant mariners. Eight, we support a strong merchant marine reserve component in the U.S. Naval Reserve. And finally, we support legislation requiring the Department of Veterans Affairs to treat merchant marine veterans of action in World War II as they treat all other veterans. We in the Navy League are a diverse group with a variety of backgrounds, but without exception, we understand the importance of a strong and capable merchant marine, and we appreciate the commitment, the hard work, dangers, and sacrifice that many in the merchant marine have endured on our behalf. We're committed to keeping the American merchant marine strong, and we thank them for all that they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. It is now my pleasure, continuing welcome again, Tim Huppert of the Port Manatee Anchor House Seafarers Mission.
The work with Anchor House does is quite different than I think when I think about Maritime Day, because we deal mostly with foreign flag vessels and foreigners, and Anchor House last year hosted 39 different countries into the center and thousands of seafarers from all over the world. But today I just did a little digging about the United States Merchant Marine and educated myself quite a bit. So it is my honor to gather with you today to remember the brave, hardworking and sacrificing individuals who served in the United States Merchant Marine during our time and before. According to the United States Merchant Marine Academy, merchant marine officers are those of exemplary character who serve America's marine transportation and defense needs in peace and war. With 95% of the world's products transported over water, these leaders are vital to the effective operation of our merchant fleet, both commercial and military transport during war and peace. Academy graduates abide by the motto, acta non verba, deeds not words, and are leaders that exemplify the concept of service above self. The United States Merchant Marine is a fleet of U.S. civilian-owned merchant vessels operated either by government or private sector, which engage in commerce or transportation of goods and services, including passengers during peacetime. The fleet operates in this role in and out of the navigable waters of the U.S. As of 2006, the United States merchant fleet numbered 465 ships and about 100,000 members. In time of war, the merchant marine is capable of being an auxiliary to the Navy and can deliver troops and supplies for the military. And I learned this firsthand from Jim Waters, who I'm sure we all miss dearly. He was a fun guy to sit and chat with. The merchant marine, however, does not have the role in combat. The midshipmen of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy were among the first to arrive at the docks near Ground Zero on September 11th, 2001, to transport supplies, emergency workers throughout New York Harbor, and provide emergency medical support. The history of ships and shipping in North America go back at least as far as Leif Erikson, who established the short-lived settlement of Vinland in present-day Newfoundland. The shipping industry developed as colonies grew and the trade with Europe increased. The connection between the American colonies and Europe, with shipping as its only conduit, would continue to grow unhindered for almost 200 years. The first wartime role of identifiable United States Merchant Marine took place around June 12, 1775, around Maine. The Merchant Marine was active in subsequent wars, from the Confederate commerce raiders of the American Civil War to the assault on the Allied commerce of the First and the Second World Wars. 3.1 million tons of merchant ships were lost in World War II. Mariners died at the rate of 1 in 24, which is the highest rate of casualties of any service. 733 American cargo ships were lost. 8,651 of the 215,000 who served perished in troubled waters off enemy shores. Merchant shipping also played a role in Vietnam and Korean wars. During the Korean War, the number of ships under charter grew from 6 to 255. In September of 1950, when the U.S. Marine Corps went ashore at Incheon, 13 Navy cargo ships, 26 chartered American, and 34 Japanese manned merchant ships under the operational control of Military Sea Transportation Service participated. During the Vietnam War, ships crewed by civilian seamen carried 95% of supplies used by the American Armed Forces. During the Gulf War, merchant ships of the Military Sealift Command delivered more than 11 metric tons of vehicles, helicopters, ammunition, fuel, and other supplies and equipment. At one point during the war, more than 230 government-owned and chartered ships were involved in the sea lift. Merchant seamen went on to make their mark on the world. The first was the mariner John Paul Jones, who went on to become, as I read, the father of the American Navy. Douglas North went from seaman to navigator to winner of the 1993 Nobel Prize for Economics. And then as I was reading, I found something interesting. As a child, you know, we watched all these movies, McHale's Navy and Columbo and that. So the names may be familiar to some of us who are individuals who serve as merchant mariners during World War II era. A few of them later became television characters. Raymond Bailey played Milburn Drysdale in the Beverly Hillbillies. Peter Falk played the title character on Columbo. James Garner played on the Rockford Files. Jack Lord served as Steve McGarrett on the original Hawaii Five-0. And Carolyn O'Connor played Archie Bunker in All in the Family. And Denver Pyle played Uncle Jesse Duke on the Dukes of Hazzard. And I think most of us probably can reminisce with most of those names. In addition, Paul Tetlow Sr., the founder of Orange County Choppers and Orange County Ironworks, served as a merchant mariner during the Vietnam War. Now, I'm not a very good poet reader, but I have one last thing I'd like to share with you. It's called The Merchant Marine by Edgar Quest. We seldom get their names in spite of all they do. They're merely mentioned in the press as members of the crew. Yet they're the men whose courage, arms, and clothes equips and feeds the boys in every battle zone. Who do the glorious deeds we speak of them as merchant men? Yet when they once set out, no matter their course may run, death follows them about. They're stalked by death from port to port. When once the anchor is weighed from master down to cabin boy, they're sailors unafraid. They know the lurking submarines, they've seen them break the wave. And still, with little means to fight, the cruel odds they brave. Sometimes they're stuck in the dead of night, and into rafts they fall, and drift about and pray to God to save them all. We think of them as merchantmen, but when the war is won, they too must share the pride for duty nobly done. And when the world is free once more, and home the boys from sea, and from the foxholes come the lads with us once more to be. When the skies the boys slip down, let all remember then the courage of the Yankee youth who sailed as merchantmen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you the President and CEO of the Sarasota Manatee Chapter of the American Merchant Marine Veterans, Mr. Richard Arcond.
Thanks, Mike. Oops. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel honored to take the place of the late Jim Waters, whom we all know. Many of us knew him as the treasurer of the Propeller Club for some time here at Port Manatee. Men like Jim were once described by a physician who served the merchant marine veterans in World War II, and he described them like this. They were adventurous, imaginative, and chance-taking. They were not kept at home by the need for security, never were. A rough, tough, and independent lot, they took what came their way in those days, and thank God that they could. There was, on the sea for them, ever-constant danger of torpedoes, long nights of complete blackout, and days of combat alertness, months without proper sleep, irregular meals, eternal presence of the emotional strain of war, leading to physical and psychological exhaustion. They went to sea, and back to sea, and back to sea again, until one wonders how it was possible to face the continual expectation of death, or long chances against survival. Those who suffered the most seemed the most anxious to get back to sea. The ships continued to sail. The cargoes were carried, troops and munitions were delivered where they were needed most, and more ships each month were manned. The nervous strain showed up as, quote, convoy fatigue, the combat fatigue of the Army, Navy, and Coast Guard. This comes from the obvious stress and strain of their service, with one other personal ingredient, personal morale. By that I mean the constant feeling of groupness, of being an integral part of a big mass movement. The American people must help here. They must do all that is humanly possible to make the men of the Merchant Marine feel, each one of them, that they belong not only to the fighting forces, but to the big American family, and that they have our lasting respect and admiration. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you a champion of the U.S. Merchant Mariners, Lieutenant Commander of the U.S. Coast Guard Sector, St. Petersburg, Andre Whitby.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Commander Andre Whitby, and I'm representing Captain of the Port, Captain Cheryl Dickinson. Captain Dickinson could not be with you this morning due to her involvement in the Coast Guard District 7 hurricane exercise, and she asked that I represent her. We're gathered here this morning as we take a moment to reflect on many contributions to our great nation made by merchant mariners throughout our history. National Maritime Day is a national commemoration established by Congress which honors the contributions of the American merchant marine civilians who defended the freedom of the United States since 1775 and who executed the largest sea lift the world has ever known during World War II. The observance of National Maritime Day also honors the maritime industry for the enormous benefits it brings to our countrymen in terms of transportation, jobs, goods, and recreational opportunities. You directly support and facilitate today's global economy, in which hundreds of millions of people all over the world rely for access to a great multitude of commodities, fuel, food, goods, and produce on which we all depend. Most Americans, however, give little or no thought to shipping, not to mention the huge range of related maritime activities that together make up the shipping industry. Despite its tremendous importance and direct bearing on our personal and national well-being, the very nature of shipping makes it something of a background industry. For most people, most of the time, ships are simply out of sight and out of mind. And the same can be said of the seafarers who crew them and port workers who load and unload them. This lack of notoriety stands in contrast to the global economy that depends so heavily on their efforts. You are the unsung heroes of an unsung industry. So every once in a while, we pause and take the opportunity to pay tribute to our seafarers and those that support the men and women who set out to sea and the dozens of industries that comprise the maritime community. Thank you all for what you do to support the continued flow of maritime commerce and the economic vitality of our nation. The U.S. maritime industry helps ensure our prosperity during times of peace, but it also ensures our defense in times of war, and is the latter that gives us cause for a somber reflection. While I commend you for your contribution to the nation's prosperity, I am compelled to remind you of the tremendous sacrifices made by U.S. and allied merchant mariners to ensure the security of our country and to defeat the seemingly persistent threat of global tyranny that plagues mankind. In a moment, we'll commend a wreath to the deep as a small acknowledgement of the enormous sacrifice made by U.S. merchant marines on behalf of past and present future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the privilege of addressing you this morning and the opportunity to join Port Manatee for its commemoration to National Maritime Day.
Thank you, Lieutenant Commander Whidbey. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our final presenter today, esteemed Chairman of the Manatee County Port Authority, Carol Whitmore.
Thank you. On behalf of Manatee County Port Authority, we wish you good morning and welcome. Thank you, Mike, for your kind introduction, and I'd like to acknowledge Mike Burton, President of the Port Manatee Propeller Club, and members of the Propeller Club, who for the past 8 years have organized and sponsored this sobering reminder of the perils of the sea and the brave U.S. men and women who challenge our oceans and who make up our merchant marine. Each year on May 22nd, our country celebrates National Maritime Day. This observance recognizes American merchant marines for all the great contributions and sacrifices they've made and still make today for our country. These sacrifices are felt at Port Manatee too. It's far too easy to overlook them, but they are here. Soon after Port Manatee began operations, our maritime community was reminded of the dangers of the chosen trades. On January 10th, 1977, 4 husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers were lost at sea when the MV Sawyer went down in the Gulf of Mexico. Captain David Lampkin of Bradenton, cook and first mate Clarence Bunnekemper, and engineer Ronald Peterson, both of Arcadia, and mate Hubert Ballard of Satellite Beach. They all went down with the Sawyer 30 miles off the Louisiana coast in heavy seas while towing a barge from Crystal River to New Orleans. Survivors included Charles Bosford of Bradenton and Ed Polisher of Pensacola, found safe after 33 hours in near freezing temperatures in 10 to 12-foot waves in the tug's lifeboat. They looked on helplessly as their crewmates perished because they had no oars to guide the lifeboat. The search was abandoned 8 days after the Sawyer sank in the deep water. Those lost souls were the first from Port Manatee to lose their lives at sea. but sadly, they have not been the last. A marker at Port Manatee commemorating their tragic passing remains as a silent tribute offered by their co-workers at Belcher Oil Company, now Trans Mountain. National Maritime Day is for them and the thousands of U.S. merchant mariners who have perished at sea during times of peace and conflict, but always in service to our nation and its proud heritage as the sea-going people. We honor them, one and all, today. On Monday, May 27th, we will observe another humbling day of remembrance, Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a day of remembering the men and the women who died while serving in the United States Armed Forces. One difference between the 2 days, Memorial Day and National Maritime Day, is that National Maritime Day is an observance, not a federally recognized holiday. It's not the only inequity between the two either. Supporters of World War II-era merchant mariners who braved enemy fire to deliver troops and supplies to battlegrounds have long fought a campaign in the hopes of persuading Congress to compensate them for veterans' benefits that were denied more than 60 years ago. They call it just compensation. I call it long overdue. We acknowledge that fight is much more difficult now because their numbers are dwindling, and Congress has many new members who are unfamiliar with their quest. In the meantime, this observance recognizes America's merchant marines for all their services and their bravery in serving the nation we all call home. The United States has always been and always will be a great maritime nation. From our origins and from every period of peace and conflict since the U.S. merchant marine has been the foundation of the United States' prosperity and security. From the founder of the U.S. Merchant Marines, John Paul Jones, to the crew of the T.I. Sawyer, they are responsible for powering in the world's largest economy, strengthening our ties between trading partners around the world, all while supporting our military forces by shipping troops and supplies wherever they need to go. Today, I ask you to remember them next Monday, too, when you gather with your family and friends. They have done so much for us, and a moment of remembrance is not too much to ask. God bless our merchant marines, and God bless America.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitmore. Now I would like to ask Commissioner Whitmore to join me in the laying of the wreath, and then that will be followed by a moment of silence. Please remain standing as the U.S. Coast Guard Color Guard retires the colors. That concludes today's ceremonies. Thank you so much for coming.